Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Teaching Statistics Across Any Setting. Tonight we have two presenters with us that are sharing a longer version of their best practices sessions, I believe. One of the presenters tonight is Josh Wilkerson. He's going to be presenting on statistics, significance, and service. And our other presenter is Danielle Maletta. She's going to be presenting on unit summaries. So first we're going to have Josh share with us. Let me read Josh's bio here. Dr. Josh Wilkerson currently serves as a mathematics department chair for K-12 at Regent School of Austin in Austin, Texas. He has taught AP statistics for the past 11 years and has been implementing service learning projects for the past 10. His dissertation was on the benefits of service learning in mathematics, and a portion of his research was recently published in the journal Primus. And so I will let Josh share his screen and give his presentation on statistics, significance, and service.
All right, thank you very much. Let's see if I can get the screen share here. All right. Hopefully that's working out and you can see everything on my screen here. So I appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. My thanks to Lee and Bob for inviting me to do this. So as Lee mentioned, I've been doing this for quite some time and I have a lot to say about it. And so I'm happy to answer what questions you have and have some interaction in that regard. What I will say to start with when it comes to implementing a service learning project in statistics is normally the main question I get asked is usually about the logistics, right? The implementation, the timing, how do you do it and still cover content, all that kind of stuff. And I'm happy to have those conversations with you, but I'm also giving this presentation in the reality of where we currently find ourselves as teachers, and that I imagine you already find yourselves doing quite a few things that you never envisioned yourself doing, and you already have kind of enough balls to juggle, so to speak. And if you're not already kind of doing a big project like this, then it might seem overwhelming to even consider it, and that's understandable for sure. So I think where I'm going to try to spend my time talking with you today is less on the logistics of how to do it. I can point you to some resources for that. But I think what I want to spend my time doing is talking about the motivation for it and the significance of it, right? With an intended play on words there for the statistics audience. Because honestly, like you're not going to be able to do a service learning project well unless you are sold on its value and you're ready to go all out for it without necessarily having all your ducks in a row and knowing what exactly the end result's going to be. Because my experience is it's rarely that clean cut, and you have to have the ability to flex like we always do as teachers. But if you believe that it can be a valuable experience for your students, then your students will believe it's going to be a valuable experience. So I'm going to try to talk briefly just from that angle of it and my own experience in doing it. And then I'm happy to take questions if people have them, or give my contact information here on the first slide if you want to engage in a longer conversation later. So the first thing that I always start out with is figuring out what is the experience of most students going into a math classroom, right? As a math teacher, like we teach statistics, but we most likely teach other things besides statistics. And what is the number one question that typically comes to your mind that the students will ask whenever they're, really want to kind of stick it to you as a math teacher? What's the question that they ask you?
When are we going to use this?
When are we ever going to use this, right? Or some version of that, right? And so it's never, and it's always like that, right? It's always like, when am I ever going to use this? It's never like, this is amazing, when do I get to use this? Like they never ask it that way, right? So Um, this is kind of the number one question that I always hear in a math classroom, and um, maybe think kind of where this is going in terms of doing service learning and doing statistics, but I want to take things in a slightly different direction, and that in my time in thinking through this question from students, that it's not really a question, that the students are making a statement, right? They're really saying, i'm I'm not going to use this, so why should I value what's happening right there, right? If they're using this as kind of an excuse to disengage from whatever the activity is you're trying to sell them on. Um, and I think we sometimes pride ourselves as statistics teachers as not getting this question in stats class compared to other math classes that we teach. And my own experience kind of bears that out as well. I think that's certainly true. But I want to kind of caution us that from a stats perspective, if we think, well, because we're teaching statistics and that everything we do is in some sort of context and application, that our students aren't going to be feeling this way about stats class as they would about like algebra. But I think if the deeper issue is the students aren't really asking this question of application, that the question that they're really asking is why should I value this, is what they really mean, then if all we're doing is continually offering them just applications of mathematics, then we're still not addressing kind of this root issue and desire that most students have, which is to find value and to be valued as a person. And that's really what we're all about as educators, is teaching the student, not necessarily as teaching the content. And so I would encourage us to consider that that's really what students are asking whenever they come into our classrooms, and it's the first thing that we should be thinking through of how do we actually answer this question of values in our math programs, in our statistics classes. Um, I don't think it's just students that feel this way about mathematics. I think I can peg teachers as being kind of in this category as well. And my exercise that I like to try to do is, so if you're listening, you want to participate, if you kind of just close your eyes for a minute, uh, think about a moment in teaching that was just amazing. It was like, this is it. This is why I got into teaching. This moment right here, everything is going so well, right? You're getting like the students standing up on desks saying, "Oh, captain, my captain," right? Like you have that kind of moment in teaching. um, if you have that visual in your mind, I I would really love to hear what's like just a word, a two, short sentence that describes what the scene that you just pictured.
Students are engaged in asking questions because they want to know more.
They're excited in the sense that, as Lee said, they're asking questions and they're not necessarily asking questions about content per se. They're just asking questions that you can tell are a deep curiosity for what you're talking about. They actually they actually look like they're interested.
Yeah. Um, so if we had a larger room, we had more people, had more time, had an easier venue to have this conversation than through Zoom. I imagine everyone else would have something similar to say, that is really kind of language that relates more to the dispositions of the students. I'd be highly doubtful that any of you would tell me anything like Pythagorean theorem or student's t-test, or like I I get very rarely, in fact, I haven't yet, whenever I've done that exercise with teachers, gotten a content response from teachers. That like the thing that they most value out of their experience in teaching is not necessarily content driven. Like the content's there, and I'm sure in those instances, if I were to examine that lesson, like I'm sure the content was operating at a really high level in all those situations. But the takeaway for you as an educator was less about the content they were receiving, and it was more about the type of student they were becoming. Right, it was more on the level in terms of valuing the experience itself. And here's my just kind of standard slide to show that this isn't just me pontificating on things. Like there's research to this effect. So this is looking at when teachers talk about their mathematics classrooms, they're just as likely to mention student enthusiasm or hostility as a in regard, and also in reporting their cognitive achievements. And similarly, inquiries of students are just as likely to produce affective as well as cognitive responses. Comments about liking or hating mathematics are very common, which should not be any surprise to us as teachers. This sort of language is also present in standards that you'll see, be it NCTM or from the National Research Council in the book Adding It Up. So NCTM says being mathematically literate includes having an appreciation of the value and beauty of math, as well as being able and inclined to appraise and use quantitative information. And the 5 mathematical proficiency strands from the National Research Council, which have kind of blended their way into Common Core language, include procedural fluency, et cetera, but then also productive disposition, which is characterized as the habitual inclination to see math as sensible, useful, and worthwhile, right? So it's more than just a student experience that's common to us. It's more than just how teachers feel. Like this has been documented in terms of research, in terms of positional statements, as things that we want to aim for as we're teaching math to students. So the question is, well, how are we doing with that? And this is where I kind of love this quote. As it stands, our current methods of teaching math are producing untold numbers of students who see math more about natural ability rather than effort, who are willing to accept poor performance in math, and who often openly proclaim their ignorance of math without embarrassment, and who treat their lack of accomplishment in math as a permanent state over which they have little control. So this is pulled from a paper from 1992, so it's old. But relatively, but it's not dated. And I know that this statement is not dated because I'm a math teacher, and I see this every single day. I see it not just in my classroom, and I know I'm among people who've had these same experiences here. What tends to happen when you meet someone new in a social situation and they ask you what you do and you tell them, what is usually the response that you get to that?
Mostly groaning.
Yeah.
I hate math, which was just said. Number 1.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is weird, right? When you think about it, you tell people like, this is what I do, and their immediate response is, I was never good at that, or I hate that. I think mathematicians and math teachers are probably second only to priests in terms of the number of confessions they get from people. And it's just kind of this weird dynamic, but it's true of what's happening. And like things like that are what keeps me up at night in terms of planning for my classroom and thinking through how it is I want to engage my students so that they don't become that, or if they are that, if they can kind of start to be open to new ideas. And that's really where I think service learning plays a big part. So kind of continuing in this vein briefly here of research in math education, I like this quote that mathematics educators who set out to modify existing strongly held belief structures of their students are not likely to be successful addressing and only the content of their students' beliefs. It'll be important to provide experiences that are sufficiently rich, varied, and powerful in their emotional content, right? So to change kind of these deeply held beliefs, right? It's not just about telling students to feel differently or just addressing content. It's about providing experiences that are sufficiently rich, varied, and powerful. And that's where I see service learning as being extremely valuable. It's not just an application of content, but it's a chance for students to experience an application of content in a certain environment that lends itself not just to a deeper understanding of the material, but of seeing it being used in a way to help and aid others. So really quickly for service learning, what I mean when I say service learning, I suppose I should define it. I mean, at a basic level, think of doing some sort of community service, but doing it in a way where it's not, say, like picking up trash off the side of the road or something like that. All that's certainly maybe a thing to do with students every now and then. I mean it more in the context of using the math that they're learning in class and applying that in some way that can be of service. So for statistics, what that usually means is finding a nonprofit organization and basically being freelance statisticians for them, helping them as an organization gather data, analyze data, and present results back to them in terms of evaluating the effectiveness of their organization or whatever their needs may be for whatever clients they're serving. So one thing about service learning that kind of fits this mold of what I've been pitching so far is that ultimately the effective learning objective is really the primary driving force. And like I said, that's kind of the thing you have to be behind in order to pull this off well, beyond just the logistics of doing it. Understanding that it's more than improving scores on an AP exam, and it's more than the letter grade they get for the project, and that the students see that too, that they understand it's not just this is an assignment or a project that I want to get an A on, it's I need to help this organization and they're depending on me is the primary motivator for what's going on behind the project. And I think that helps spur the cognitive side of things at a pretty high level, because we're asking them to take just raw data sets and synthesize them using the skills they have in the context of where it's useful for the organization that they're partnering with. And it's not necessarily a question that's set out before them like on an AP exam in terms of constructing a confidence interval or finding a least squares regression line, but they have to understand based on the data they've received, what's the best way to analyze it, and then to be able to present results that are meaningful in language that's understandable to their clients. And a big component here in the last few bullet points of this slide is just understanding that really the way we assess students is going to communicate what we value as teachers. And so finding ways to assess them where we actually communicate that these effective learning objectives are things that we really care about. And also giving students space for reflection. If you do any kind of research or just look into what is service learning, you're going to see it constantly brought into reflection. It's going to be language that shows up pretty often in terms of doing service learning well. Means giving students a very intentional and guided space to reflect on the practices that they're doing. And I've done that with journal prompts in the past. And it's just always fun to see the students. It's like one of the homeworks that I enjoy grading, right, is reading through just what their interaction has been with their service projects. So my goal is that hopefully through service learning, we can change the student questions of kind of why should I value this as this puzzled look and not sure what the answer is to something where the answer is pretty clear. So this is a picture of an article from my stats class where one of the projects we do is partnering with the local homeless outreach organization and doing kind of our survey research for them and how they're being effective in combating homelessness and developing affordable housing. That's a project that we do that I can go into more details on it at another time if you want to connect with me, or I'll share with you kind of where you can find more details on that. At the end of the project, I give my students a feedback survey. This is just one I happened to find and grab. I've done this every year, so I can say, you just have to believe me, that cumulatively I see pretty much the same kind of response pattern every year. I need to go back at some point when I get some time and kind of put that all together into a single graph. This is just from a Google form survey of seeing how students responded to seeing that the subject matter could be used in everyday life was quite obvious to them in terms of application. It helped them to better understand course content, maybe not a strong 5 response, but generally positive responses from students, and that this helped them understand the course content a little deeper. The interactions with their community partner helped. Here's where it starts to get a little bit more interesting, I think, is the community work made me more aware of my own biases and prejudices, which is maybe not something they expected to have happen going into statistics class. The service aspect of this course helped me develop a deeper appreciation for the course content, was a strongly positive response as well. And then lastly here, I've got a quote from a student where I asked them to talk about kind of their attitude toward mathematics. And this student said, "My attitude in mathematics is much more positive. It was hard, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the I'm no good at math thing didn't change, but I do think I'm sure I can learn it." And I like using this quote from this student because it's not as polished as maybe some of the other answers I got from students. It was just deeply honest, and I'm idealistic, sure, and kind of selling the aims of education in this presentation, but I'm also a realist and knowing that I don't want every student to walk away from the classroom thinking like this is their favorite subject now and they're such an enthusiast at it, but just starting to question and to understand how, yeah, I might not be good at math, but I can kind of appreciate what it's doing. And this student, I think, really kind of exemplified this. He went on to say, "It'll just take a little bit longer when you don't feel completely discouraged about it. When you feel that you have a shot to understand it and learn it, for me at least, really raises my attitudes toward it. It doesn't feel like this hopeless thing that I suffer through. It's just a hill that you climb," right? And us in education might think of that in terms of like the growth mindset attitude coming through there. The benefits were I was actually seeing this was a real life thing. You're going to use stats in real life. So yay, they got that point as well. You're going to be able to benefit people and you're going to be able to benefit yourself. So to me, the takeaway with this student wasn't just seeing that stats was something that you can apply, but that you can see it benefiting the people around them, local community, and ultimately themselves in terms of their appreciation and their attitude of mathematics. So that's kind of my thing. I'll stop here shortly. In terms of trying to encourage you, motivate you to start thinking about this at a very deeper level. And in terms of resources, if you're interested, so AP with Wii Service has been a great opportunity to be able to do that. If you visit their website, just Google AP with Wii Service, you'll come to this webpage. They have a lot of great resources in terms of like guiding questions, like an implementation packet that will take you through kind of step by step. Here's the questions you need to consider. Here's how you can assess students. Here's how you can do reflection problems. So this is a really solid resource if you haven't explored this before. They have some very specific modules that they designed for courses. Statistics is not one of them as of yet that I'm aware of, but they have general principles that you can follow as you're thinking through how do I actually design and pull off a service project. And through AP with the Wii Service, students also get recognition on their transcripts as well in terms of being a part of this particular program. And if you go to the website slmath.com, that's service learning math. So slmath.com is a website I occasionally pay attention to and have updated in the past. I haven't necessarily gotten around to it a lot this year, but in the past, it used to be something that was updated with resources for service learning. And so if you go there, like the top post that's on that page has like all my documents that I give to my students in terms of project expectations, grading rubrics, calendars, project descriptions, what they do for their proposal, what they do for their final reports, their journal prompts, like all of that's on there. that you're welcome to kind of peruse and browse through. And as always, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you have. I'd be happy to talk through what has and hasn't worked for me in the past. But at this point, I'll kind of cede the floor to either questions or to our next presenter.
I have a question here. And I'm sure maybe some of that will be through the website when I read that. So when your kids come in, is it your whole class is paired up with one group, or do you have, a group of students that are, multiple groups that you're working with? And as a follow-up on that, are you, is it the same group every year? In other words, it's kind of like a partnership.
That's a good question. I've done both, right? So I've done projects where students would work in kind of small groups of 4-ish to find a partner organization, and that year I kind of laid that out intentionally of wanting the students to have some ownership in the organization they chose. We went about it that way. In recent years, the article I just showed with the homeless ministry that we work with, they're a fairly large group, and so it's a pretty big project to undertake. So that's really had to involve my entire class working on that same project. And that's been a project that we've done for the last few years now, and have the benefit of looking at kind of some longitudinal data for them. But in the past, prior to this kind of commitment cycle that we've gotten into, I've done it both ways in terms of either smaller groups or entire class.
Is that, you introduce that at the beginning of the course, or is this, at what point do you feel that they have enough knowledge that they can go forward and you're saying, okay, go ahead and work with these people, or
Yeah.
is it
So I usually set the tone, like I put this on their radar from day one, that it's something that they will be doing eventually in the course. And usually toward the back half of the fall semester is when I'll have them start kind of responding to some journal prompts. So one thing I do is to try to put the specific study that we do in context. So I'll have them do kind of some non-statistical reading on homelessness in general and homelessness in the city of Austin, and some background reading on this organization, and to kind of give their own kind of reflective responses on that, to kind of set the stage for those conversations moving forward. And our fall semester will kind of culminate with them writing a project proposal as kind of their final paper of the fall semester, using what they know about gathering data and experimental design. We've covered all of those concepts by that point. And we've talked a little bit about, I don't quite follow the same model as, I don't necessarily teach linearly. We use Introduction to Statistical Investigations is the book that we use. So we kind of cycle through things and do a lot of investigative studies. And so they're aware already in the fall semester of different ways of analyzing data and understanding of p-values and confidence intervals and all of that. So they're able to write kind of just a basic proposal of here's what we're going to kind of aim for gathering our data, and then questions we're going to try to answer. And then largely our spring semester is where we're doing the bulk work of the project. We typically actually gather data. It's usually around February when we're actually gathering the data to work with, and then we continue to use that data set throughout the spring semester. So one of the responses I have for teachers that ask about kind of like, when do you do this on top of everything else? I try my best to integrate it as much as possible and like use the data that we gather as our kind of class data set that we constantly come back to when we come up to new concepts, and like use the project as a way to teach the content instead of thinking of it as kind of an extra thing to do. So that's one thing I'll throw in there, but that's usually roughly kind of the time frame that we operate on.
good? Anything else right now?
I didn't really see anything else in the chat, but I did put the links to the different websites that Josh was mentioning into the chat, so you have them in case you want to access those. So I will say I was not aware of the service learning that is linked with the College Board. So that was new to me. I will say that. Very interesting. Thanks for sharing, Josh.
Thank you.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Next up, we have Danielle Maletta, and she's going to be presenting on unit summaries. Danielle has been teaching mathematics in a variety of settings for over 20 years. She's currently at Eastside Catholic School in Sammamish. I think I might have mispronounced that, so she can correct me later if needed. Washington. She has been teaching AP statistics since 2011, when it was first offered at her current school. In addition to AP statistics, Danielle teaches computer science. She's been an AP Stat reader for the past 2 years, so she has taught both, or been a reader in both Kansas City and online, so she got to experience both of those. And she has presented at different conferences on a range of topics. And so now I'm going to invite Danielle to take over the screen.
Thank you, Lee. I will get this up. So if you happen to see my best practices presentation, this isn't terribly different, maybe a few additional details. And thank you, Josh, for sharing. That was awesome. Definitely something to look into for my school. And I love that you quoted from adding it up on the 5 strands, because I fought hard to integrate those into our department goals for all students in our school. So here we go. Essentially, I'm just going to talk to you. This isn't anything like mind-blowing, but somewhat interesting. What I do with my students are these unit summaries, and I started them a few years ago, and my students just constantly said, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I even had some students who, you know, would check out quite frequently during class time, but would absorb enough to get by, and then they would simply use the unit summaries to learn the content in time for the test and the AP exam. Not the best course of learning, but they were successful with that. I just recently gave a course evaluation at the semester, and this was the feedback that was received. So which learning tasks below were most useful in helping you learn course content? Select all that apply. So I don't teach a gajillion students. But you can see here at the top mark is the unit summaries. Don't tell AP, but sadly, the AP daily videos and classroom quizzes did not score very high. I guess this is being recorded, so that's not going to be a secret. But time and again, this is always what students report, that they really, really like these. So what I kind of want to do is just walk through what the process is and explain its usefulness in terms of learning and organization. You know, the whole idea is that students learn better. I don't need to tell you guys this, you're all educators, but they need to synthesize ideas. So, you know, we have some piecemeal things that kind of happen over the course of a unit, and they need to bring it all together and try to do so in their own words as much as possible. So as soon as we get to the end of a unit, sometimes it's even when we're, sorry, the chat popped up and then I got squirrel. Okay. So when, sometimes we'll finish like a section in a day, and then that same day we'll do the unit summary, just because there's not tons of time for review. And then what they do is they use this as a reference when they're doing any of the review tasks and practice work. So anytime they're doing a practice exam, they have this reference. So the idea is it's synthesized, and they're always using a resource that is accurate, because we don't want them to practice things that are incorrect. And then at the end of the course, it ends up being super handy for review. So what happens is they build this library here from all of the units of their resources. And then also when you integrate, you know, oftentimes I'll talk about, you know, scope of inference or something like that. And we can be like, oh, where's that? And they know exactly where to find that information, which is also kind of cool. So the format is generally a graphic organizer. It's nothing like crazy. It's just a table. But oftentimes the content of the course really lends itself well to comparing and contrasting. And so that works out really well. Now, this is an example. This is a non-example here. This does not lend itself well to comparing and contrasting. This is just working through content. But you can see here, this is differentiating between observational studies and experiments. And you can kind of link between, like, this is what's attributed to experiments in terms of the variables. This is what it is with observational studies. And so it kind of helps sort things out in their brain and really gives them a clear picture of things. When we start getting into inference, differentiating between what's the difference between a confidence interval and a hypothesis test. And then, of course, you get into like 1 proportion, 2 proportion, all that good stuff. So here's kind of just a walkthrough. I don't need to teach you the content. You clearly know what you're doing. But this is, for instance, kind of how things would work. So this is unit 5 on sampling distribution, unit 5 according to the AP sequence. And so all of the summaries kind of start with this general concept. So just kind of what's the big picture here? What do I need to be thinking about? Anything here that's in inking is stuff that we add together. So we kind of talk about just, what is this whole thing about this sampling distribution, which they have such a hard time wrapping their head around. Just where does it come from? And starting with from a population to sample data to approximate sampling distribution to a true sampling distribution, and just kind of getting them to see the flow there, and just kind of big concepts. So sampling variability is a big concept, and sample size and its impact are kind of important features. So just kind of going through, in my experience, what I've seen on exams, what are the big concepts that they need to wrap their head around. Then we get into a little more nitty gritty. And so you can see here for sampling distributions, it works really well. I just have proportions on one side and means on the other. And you can just go through and, we walk through proportions first and talk about those, and then look at means, and then we talk about, I always group them by whatever needs to be included in terms of their written responses for the FRQs. So these things are all grouped together because that's for describing the sampling distribution. For the hypothesis test, there's the state. I use the practice of statistics, so I'm always like state, plan, do, conclude, but the checking conditions, the state and the hypotheses, doing the work, and then giving a conclusion. And so I always kind of group them together in a nice neat block so that they can kind of see how that works. And then just always little notes about what are the different variables mean, and any sort of annoying calculator functions that they need to remember. And then again, just building into the differences of 2 proportions and the differences of 2 means. So this is a really nice, neat way to organize their ideas. And I'm not just writing this down and having them like copy it feverishly. We're definitely talking about it as we're working through it. Students are offering answers, that sort of thing. So it's a means to really discuss and wrap their heads around everything. That is it. That's a very brief explanation, but it just gives you an idea of what I do with that. If anyone wants copies or anything, I have no problem sending them your way. I can give you blank ones and filled out ones, whatever your pleasure. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, Danielle, thank you for presenting. I might have a question here, and I apologize for that squirrel moment.
That's okay. I just saw the orange flashing, like, oh no, something is around.
No, it's just, I had that happen to me today when I was teaching, and it was like, wait, somebody said that they needed me to go back to the beginning of that page. How long ago did they ask that question? Oh my gosh, that was like 10 minutes ago. Oh,
Yeah.
So have any students come back? I'm kind of curious, have any students come back to you and said, hey, I kept these for college and these are helpful?
Yes, a ton of students. So it's funny, and actually some of them who discard them ask me to email them attachments later on. But yeah, they're always coming back and asking for them. Or I had one kid that told me he was distributing them to his class at TCU or something. So they do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that might help his fellow students, but it's yeah, you know what? You really need to let them create their own, because that's the point.
Yeah, that is the whole point. to synthesize the ideas, but having a resource is also beneficial to some degree. Yeah.
Right. That's true. That's true. All right. That's a great idea. And I don't know, I think that there's definitely value in having students create those for themselves because they do remember more then and it makes more sense. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also have used it as a bribe sometimes, so that they get to use it on the test under certain conditions, or like they can choose. I've done all kinds of different things, like they can choose to use it on the test for docking 5%, or not use it on the test and they get a bonus or all kinds of things. Doesn't really matter now because I don't do that kind of grading anymore, but it's a nice incentive for them as well. They feel so comfortable with it, and it's funny, even in one of my recent group FRQs post questions, I asked how often do they look at the unit summary, and most of them said they didn't even look at it, even though they had it as available to them during the test.
Well, and ultimately that's what you want to have happen by the time they take the AP
Yeah.
exam, right? You don't want them having to, so it's like, yeah, they just felt more comfortable just because they had it there in case they needed it.
Exactly.
But the fact that they're saying that they didn't, that's actually really, really good then, because then it's really kind of met its ultimate purpose, I would say.
Yeah.
I'm sure that those were hot items last year's AP exam.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, because it was open note. In fact, I hand delivered packets to all of my students last year in lockdown, so that they could have them at their side when they were testing. Because we use OneNote, and so they're always like doing it on the computer.
So you'll have access to those, you said, that the templates?
Oh yeah, so if you just shoot me an email, I'm happy to, here, I'll type it in the chat here. I'm happy to just send you attachments. The tricky thing is that because, oops, this is to everyone. I don't often use like Dropbox type stuff because the formatting gets all wonky. So that's why I prefer to just send you like the original Word version, and then I can also send you a PDF of it filled out.
Yeah. Danielle, I'm going to ask you a quick question here. Would you be okay if I ended up then sharing some of this with people when I do my AP Summer Institutes this summer? I lead APSIs.
Yeah. No, that's the role of teachers: beg, borrow, and steal, right?
So I will make sure that obviously that you get credit for this idea, and I'll also reference this recording that's going to be posted, and tell them if they want to learn more, they can watch your presentation within the recording.
No worries.
Great.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Jump in.
Oh,
Jump in.
Danielle, I wanted to thank you for sharing. I do graphic organizers with my students, and kind of like an old-fashioned flow chart, I guess, from my coding days. And I always ask the students to make them, and I just can't understand how they can't, at the end of the unit, put it all on one piece of paper and make this beautiful chart. And I realize I have such diverse abilities of the students to be able to put everything together. So something with the guided boxes and might be really helpful in coaching them in what they need to include and what's important. I thought my graphic organizers that I was making with the children were really, really helpful. And then when we started to get together and we looked at what was missing, I realized they were just wasting their time. So maybe something like this where they're more directed would be much more helpful. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it is a little bit scaffolded, but it's still synthesizing. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both to Danielle and Josh for presenting and sharing tonight. Two very different topics. So really appreciate that. We are scaling down a bit in terms of our presentations. We're not going to have as many presenters as we've had in the past, just because we have found that teachers are kind of busy right now as they're trying to figure out whether they're teaching virtual or hybrid or whatever is going on. But we do have two more presentations before the AP exam. On February 22nd, Jeff Dodds from Khan Academy will be here. So if you're looking for another resource besides AP Classroom to use with your students, he will be here to talk about that. And then we have on the 12th, Luke Wilcox and Lindsay Gallus, the stat medics, will be here helping us to think about reviewing for the AP exam. So that is all that we have for this evening. And I'm going to end the recording. Thanks
All right.
to everyone for being here.